The first time I met Janine Holloway, she smiled like a realtor about to close $1 million deal. Tight, practiced, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said, extending a manicured hand as I unloaded boxes from my truck. "We're a community built on order." I thought she was just being formal. Later, I realized that was her way of issuing a warning. Whispering Pines looked perfect on the surface. Rows of cream stucco homes, flower beds trimmed like they came from a catalog, and not a trash can out of place. It was everything I wanted for my grandmother and me. Quiet, clean, safe. But perfection has a price, and in our case, it wore pearls and a power suit. Janine had been the self-appointed queen of the HOA for 5 years. Officially elected, yes, but only because no one dared run against her. She enforced rules like they were scripture, but only when they suited her agenda. The mailbox paint had to be sunset bronze, not copper. Grass couldn't exceed exactly 2 inches. Wind chimes were banned after 5 p.m. Soothing sounds, she once wrote in an email, shouldn't become a neighborhood nuisance. Within my first week, I received 3 violation notices. One for my truck being oversized. One for having a bird feeder she claimed was inviting pests. And one because my recycling bin was visible from the street. For a total of 15 minutes. Meanwhile, Janine held wine tastings in the community center, past curfew, and parked her luxury SUV across 2 spots without repercussion. When I asked about the double standard, her answer was clinical. "Enforcement is at the board's discretion, and I am the board." I might have shrugged it off, chalked it up to suburban politics, if not for what happened with Granny June. She was the reason I bought the house in the first place. After her second fall, I moved her in with me. At 78, she was proud, sharp as ever, and stubborn as a sun-baked weed. But mobility had become a challenge, so I built a small wooden ramp over our front steps. Nothing fancy, just enough to make sure she could enter and exit safely in her wheelchair. The next morning, a notice flooded on my door like a scarlet letter, unauthorized structural modification, $250 fine. I called Janine, thinking it had to be a misunderstanding. Her tone was clipped. "The ramp is not in the approved design palette. It violates aesthetic harmony." "It's for my grandmother," I said. "It's temporary and safe." Janine didn't miss a beat. "If she requires special accommodations, perhaps this isn't the best neighborhood for her." I stood there, stunned, holding the phone as the line went dead. June, who overheard the call, just shook her head. "She's lucky I can't walk over there and give her a piece of my mind." That was the moment the game changed for me. Until then, I'd tried to blend in, to respect the rules, even when they felt arbitrary. But Janine had shown her cards. Her power wasn't about fairness or community. It was about control, and I had no intention of letting her control us. That night, I stood in the living room with June, scrolling through the HOA's online bylaws. Line by line, page after page, I highlighted, cross-referenced, and bookmarked. I found inconsistencies, outdated provisions, and, most importantly, clauses Janine had quietly ignored. "She's been running this place like a queen, with no one checking her," I murmured. June sipped her tea. "Every queen forgets the people she rules. Until they rise," her words echoed in my head like a war drum. That was the beginning, not just of resistance, but of strategy. I wasn't going to protest on social media or post snide notes in mailboxes. I was going to beat Janine at her own game, by knowing the rules better than she ever did. The next morning, I requested a formal review of my ramp through the Architectural Review Committee. I'd found the clause, temporary modifications for medical necessity. are permissible pending review by at least one committee member. It was a technicality, but enough to force a hearing. Janine responded by fining me again. So I applied for a seat on that very committee. The HOA charter required 3 members. At the time, there were only 2. And with no one else applying, guess who got in? When the email confirmation came, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Granny June raised her teacup in salute. Here comes the storm. No more warnings. No more whispered threats behind artificial smiles. I was done playing neighbor. Now I was playing chess, and Janine didn't even know the board had shifted. Joining the Architectural Review Committee wasn't a victory, not yet, but it gave me access. Access to the machine Janine had been running unopposed for years. My first meeting confirmed what I suspected. She had surrounded herself with spineless placeholders. Don and Linda, the remaining board members, nodded along with every suggestion Janine made. Even when she proposed fines that weren't technically allowed, they rubber-stamped them. Whether it was laziness, fear, or blind loyalty, I didn't care. I just needed one of them to crack. It happened faster than expected. The next week, during our Thursday night meeting, I asked to review Janine's property modification approvals. Just for transparency, I said with a polite smile. Janine narrowed her eyes. That's outside the scope of today's agenda. Actually, I replied, tapping the printed bylaws in front of me. All committee members have the right to audit past approvals, especially when variance requests were granted. Don blinked, looked between us like a child caught between divorcing parents, and then muttered, "He's right." Janine's jaw clenched. Fine. We'll reconvene next week. But I didn't wait for next week. The digital archives were poorly secured, typical of a place that ran more on intimidation than procedure. Late that night, I accessed her files and found what I was looking for. Janine's back patio extension, approved in record time and without the required third vote. No pictures, no inspection forms, no neighbor notifications, just a green stamp and her own initials on a 2-page form. I printed everything and tucked it into a manila folder. The next day, I filed an official grievance with the Oversight Committee downtown. Whispering Pines may have been Janine's kingdom, but it still sat inside a larger city with real rules. It was a slow burn, but the match had been struck. Meanwhile, Janine kept playing queen, oblivious to the shifting winds. She fined a family 3 doors down for installing a basketball hoop. They took it down without protest. She sent a notice to an elderly couple for leaving their porch light on all night. Light pollution, she called it. But when I stopped by their place to help them swap bulbs, they told me something interesting. She keeps using our side gate, Mr. Allen said. Says it's a shortcut to her house. You gave her permission. No, he said, chuckling bitterly. But she took the liberty anyway. That was the first I heard about her trespassing. And once you start asking questions, the neighborhood starts answering. Mrs. DeWitt told me Janine regularly used her hose to water her plants when she wasn't home. Another neighbor, Thomas, claimed she hosted private parties in the community clubhouse without paying the required rental fee. Pattern, abuse, entitlement. Still, I needed something bigger. It came almost poetically during a storm. One night, thunder rolled through the canyon, and the wind howled against my windows, like a warning. I stepped outside to secure some loose trash bins when I saw Janine sprinting from her car, struggling with an umbrella that had turned itself inside out. She ran to her front door, tried the handle, and froze, locked. She dropped the umbrella, banged on the door, and shouted, "Harold!" No response. I recognized the name. Her husband, rarely seen, rumored to be staying at their lake house more and more these days. She paced on her porch, frantically dialing her phone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language said everything. Arms flailing, voice raised, a frustrated stomp that echoed even over the thunder. And then came the kicker. She marched across the street to my house. I opened the door just as she reached for the bell. "I need to use your phone," she snapped, soaked and fuming. My husband's being an idiot and locked me out. I stepped aside politely. "Come in." She paused. Her pride wrestled with her discomfort. "You're seriously inviting me in?" she asked, suspicious. "I'm not like you," I said. "I help my neighbors." Inside, she dripped on the tile and asked for a towel. I handed her one, then watched as she paced around my living room like she owned the place. "You should get rid of that ramp," she said, absently. "It throws off the symmetry." I said nothing, just watched her unravel. She dialed her husband. Again, straight to voicemail. Her phone died in her hand. Her eyes flicked to me, calculating. "I need to wait here until my locksmith arrives." "On locksmith?" I asked. "That could take hours." "Well, I can't just stay outside." A thought crossed my mind, wicked and satisfying. "Actually, Janine," I said, walking toward the door. "You can." I opened it wide. Rain poured. Sideways across the porch. "What?" She blinked. "You're trespassing," I said with a smile. "And unlike you, I enforce the rules." She gasped. "You wouldn't," but I already had my phone out. A few taps, and Officer Martinez from the local precinct picked up. He and I had chatted a few times since moving in. "Good guy." "Hey, officer," I said. "You might want to come down here. Got a situation with a trespasser." Janine's face turned white, and when the cruiser pulled up 20 minutes later, the real show began. Red and blue lights bounced off the wet pavement as Officer Martinez stepped out of his cruiser, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. He took one look at Janine, soaked, furious, arms folded like a petulant teenager, and raised a brow. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice calm but edged with curiosity. Before I could speak, Janine launched into a tirade. "This man locked me out. He refused to let me stay dry in his home. I demand you cite him for harassment or," she gasped, searching for the right accusation. "Endangerment." Officer Martinez looked at me, then back at her. "I thought you said he locked you out." "Yes," she snapped. "He forced me outside in this weather. But it's his house. That's not the point." "It kinda is," he said, fighting a grin. Janine blinked, incredulous. She came to my door, uninvited. I explained, arms crossed but calm. I let her in for a moment out of courtesy. But when she tried to commandeer my living room as her personal lounge, I asked her to leave. "You're not seriously going to let him get away with this?" Janine shrieked. Martinez took off his cap, letting the rain patter gently over his short-cropped hair. He glanced at the clipboard in his passenger seat, where my earlier complaints sat neatly filed. I knew he'd read them, especially the one about Janine's unauthorized use of neighborhood property. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you don't live here. You weren't invited to stay. That makes you—" "What's the word?" "Oh yeah, trespassing." Janine recoiled like he'd slapped her. "I'm the HOA president," he chuckled. "And I'm the precinct's fantasy football commissioner. Doesn't mean I get to walk into people's homes and rearrange their furniture." She sputtered, furious, but no words came. Martinez leaned against the post, rain beating on his jacket. "Tell you what, I'll let this slide if you leave the property and don't come back uninvited. Sound fair?" Janine didn't respond. "Mom," he said, tone firmer now. "That wasn't a suggestion." She turned and stormed off toward her house. shoes squelching with every soggy step. But as she reached her door and once again jiggled the locked knob, she remembered. She was still locked out. She turned slowly, reluctantly. "My phone's dead," she muttered. "I need to call the locksmith." Martinez offered her his department-issued cell. "Oh," he said with a grin. "But this is official police equipment. I can't just hand it to someone who doesn't follow the rules." The grin broke into a laugh, one that echoed down the silent street like thunder after a storm. I stood on my porch, watching her world crack. For years, Janine ruled with intimidation, buried in a maze of bylaws she only half understood. She weaponized paperwork and fear. But now, standing in the rain, jacket clinging to her like a wet napkin, she looked less like a queen and more like a deposed tyrant. Eventually, Martinez relented and dialed the locksmith for her, standing with her under the overhang until the van showed up 20 minutes later. I stayed inside, watching from behind the curtain as she argued with the technician about price, punctuality, and incompetence across the board. When her door finally swung open and she disappeared inside, Martinez looked across the street and gave me a thumbs up. The next morning, Janine's wrath came in the form of an emergency HOA board meeting. She called for a vote to remove me from the Architectural Review Committee, citing conflict of interest and unbecoming conduct. It was a power play, but a desperate one. Too bad I came prepared. I brought printed documentation of her patio violation, evidence of her misuse of community funds, and sworn statements from 6 residents who'd endured her private intrusions. And I brought company: Thomas, Mrs. DeWitt, the Allens, even the family she fined over the basketball hoop. They all showed up. When the meeting opened to public comment, every hand in the room went up. What followed wasn't a discussion. It was an unmasking. Residents recounted years of small injustices, fines for harmless decorations, backhanded remarks at board meetings, warnings issued without cause. A woman named Lila even brought up how Janine once suggested she move somewhere more culturally suited after Lila put up a Diwali display. By the time the testimonies were done, Janine looked pale, cornered, like an emperor in shredded robes. Stood, my voice steady. I moved that the board vote on the removal of Janine Holloway as president due to procedural misconduct, abuse of authority, and failure to act in the community's best interest. Gasps echoed. Don looked at Linda. Linda looked at the room. Then slowly, reluctantly, they both raised their hands. A second later, a third hand rose, mine. Majority vote, Janine was out. She rose slowly, staring at the room like it had betrayed her. No words, just a bitter exhale as she walked out, shoulders hunched under the weight of a crown she never earned. As the door clicked shut behind her, a ripple of quiet applause filled the room. And I knew this wasn't revenge, this was justice. Janine's dethroning didn't just shift power. It cracked the foundation she built her reign upon. Within a week, the HOA board appointed Thomas as interim president. Mild-mannered and level-headed, he wasn't just well-liked, he was trusted. And unlike Janine, he didn't crave control. His first action? A community-wide listening session, held in the park under soft lantern lights and open skies. Residents spoke freely, some for the first time in years. I didn't say much that night. I didn't need to. My victory wasn't loud. It echoed in the silence left behind when tyranny stepped down. Still, not all was calm. Janine, now reduced to just another homeowner, couldn't accept her new status. She sulked through meetings, refused to vote, and peppered the board with passive-aggressive emails, questioning every minor decision. Then came the petty gestures. A complaint filed about my non-regulation grass length. My lawn was freshly mowed. A warning about unauthorized outdoor lighting. Solar path lights from Home Depot. She even accused me of intimidation because I waved at her from my porch. Each time, the board dismissed the complaints. Each time, her influence dimmed, but Janine wasn't done. No, her final card was the one she thought would bury me. She filed a formal grievance with the HOA legal counsel, accusing me of falsifying documents, harassing a board member, and orchestrating a hostile community takeover. It was dramatic, it was desperate, and it triggered a full-scale investigation. For 2 weeks, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Me? I welcomed the audit. I had nothing to hide. Every document I submitted was verified. Every signature cross-checked. The statements from residents were reviewed one by one. When the HOA's external compliance consultant finally delivered the findings, it wasn't in a private email. It was in front of the entire board during a public meeting. No evidence of misconduct was found. All procedures followed HOA protocol. If anything, the consultant said, glancing at Janine, our recommendation is to implement clearer checks and balances moving forward to prevent unilateral action by any one board member, past or present. The room held its breath. Then, someone clapped. Then another. Then the room filled with applause, full-throated and unafraid. Janine didn't wait for adjournment. She stood, picked up her things, and walked out, for good this time. No one followed her. In the weeks that followed, the community blossomed. The Allens were finally approved to repaint their porch. Mrs. DeWitt got her garden recognized as a neighborhood attraction instead of a nuisance. The family with the basketball hoop installed a proper court in the cul-de-sac with board funding. And me? I planted a bench near the mailbox cluster. Simple, wooden, carved with the words, for conversation, for connection. People sat on it. People talked, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Even Officer Martinez stopped by, grabbing a coffee and joking that he should start writing me up for improving morale too quickly. One afternoon, I saw Janine again. She was at the local grocery store, sunglasses on indoors, clutching a discount produce flyer, like it was a legal brief. Our eyes met briefly in the dairy aisle. She looked away first. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Her silence was an admission. Her retreat was a confession. You don't always need to win by force. Sometimes all you need is truth, consistency, and a community that's finally had enough. That's the thing about power. It only works if people believe in it. Janine ruled with fear, but when people stopped fearing her, she was just a woman with a clipboard and too much time on her hands. As summer bloomed and the neighborhood settled into a rhythm of barbecues, laughter, and unharassed joy, I realized something. We weren't just living freer. We were living better, not because Janine was gone, but because we remembered we had a say.